It's such a pleasure and an honor to be here. This is a wonderful event. So much Torah. All the merits should go to uplift Am Yisrael, to help our soldiers, to help the Shvu'im, those in hostage, to help Am Yisrael and the world wherever. I want to discuss today, in the time we have, a really interesting question. Just to give you some background as to what type of questions we're discussing. I'm going to tell you a story. My neighbor across the road is Rabbi Yoshua ben Meir. He's a Rosh Yeshiva here in Israel. And as a young man in his early 20s in the Yom Kippur War, he worked in the Rabbanut of the army, and his job was connected to Lo Aleinu, we should know for such things, of taking care of people who'd fallen in action. In any event, because he was a rabbi, a young rabbi, in the Rabbanut of the Israeli army, which is a pretty amazing thing that the Israeli army has a whole section just of rabbis, he was concerned about different preparations and training events that were happening on Shabbatot in the Yom Kippur War. So he asked for a meeting, and the army decided they would have a meeting with the top brass, the top echelons of the army, and they would bring the chief rabbi of the army, Rav Goren, to discuss what training could they do on Shabbat. Rav Goren asked that this young rabbi, Rav Yoshua ben Meir, should come along to the meeting. So Rav Yoshua ben Meir went to the base, and of course he met Rav Goren, chief rabbi of the Israeli army, there who'd blown the shofar at the Six-Day War. He met him at the base, and he looked at his watch and he said, Rav Goren, we have an hour before the meeting. So Rav Goren said, let's go to the Beit Midrash on the base, and we'll sit and learn. We'll prepare ourselves for the meeting. So off they went, and they sat in the Beit Midrash. And Rav Goren says to Rav Yoshua, he says, please go and bring me Masechet. And Rav Yoshua was sure that he would ask him for the laws of Shabbat, to bring Masechet Shabbat, or to bring the Shulchan Aruch with the laws of Shabbat. They were preparing for a meeting about what training you could do on Shabbat. But Rav Goren didn't say bring Shabbat. He said, go and bring Baba Kama. So he didn't understand. He brought Baba Kama, and they opened it up. And Rav Goren starts learning something totally not connected to anything. Rav Yoshua gets his courage up and he says, excuse me, Honorable Rabbi. He said, I thought the Rav said we wanted to prepare for the meeting. The meeting's about Shabbat. What are we doing here? Rav Goren smiles at him and he says, young man, we're about to go and discuss halachot that haven't been discussed in Am Yisrael for more than 2,000 years. These are not things you're going to find written in the Mishnah Berurah. These are not things you're going to find written in the Magen Avraham and the Shach. These are questions that haven't been discussed in 2,000 years. To prepare for this, all we need is a mind full of Torah. And so we're learning Torah. When we get a mind filled with Torah, then we can bring into the world types of Torah that haven't been discussed in 2,000 years. And that's what I want to discuss with us today in our class. Issues of the laws of war that really, since the time of the Maccabees and since the time of the middle of the Second Temple, the Jewish people haven't had an army, and we certainly haven't had rabbis who had to sit down and discuss these issues. So that's what we're going to focus on. We're going to focus on halachic question about war that really hasn't been looked at for 2,000 years. I want to begin by looking at one particular argument amongst two very great rabbis. One we've already mentioned, Rav Goren, and the other we'll mention later in the shiur. We're going to start with Rav Goren's view. The first source we're going to look at here is from the book of Dvarim, in the book of Deuteronomy, book of Dvarim, chapter 20. We have a verse that talks about the Jewish people going to war and making a siege on a city. And the verse says, if we look at the verse, Ki titzor al ir yamim rabim lilachem alea letafsa. When the Jewish people go out to war and they make a siege on a city for many, many days, going to war against it in order to capture the city. Then the verse goes on with some laws about cutting down trees. And at the end of verse 20, it says in the bold print, Ubanita matzor, you shall build a siege around the city, ala ir, Ashehi asa imcha milchama, that city which has gone to war against you, ad ridata. They're the words we're going to focus on today. Ad ridata, until it falls. You make a siege on this city until it falls. What are those words coming to tell us? Until it falls. You make a siege on the city until you're successful, until it falls. So there's this wonderful Gemara in Masechet Shabbat, which says as follows. Let's look at it. The Gemara in Masechet Shabbat says, in source number 2, Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis have taught, Ein sarim al ariot shel nochrim pachot mishlosha yamim kodem Shabbat. You shouldn't wage a battle against a foreign city 3 days before Shabbat. Why? That's another subject for the honor of Shabbat. In order that, if you've got a choice, don't make a battle on a city within 3 days of Shabbat. Ve'im itchilu, but if you've already started making a siege on a city, ein mafsikim, you don't stop. Why not? The kain haya Shammai omer, and this is what Shammai used to say. Ad ridata, the words from the verse we learned, until you've totally destroyed it, afilu be-Shabbat. The Gemara learns out that when you're making a war, a siege on a city, you can do that once you've started, even on Shabbat, because the verse says you go to battle ad ridata, until it's completely finished. Comes along Rav Goren and he asks a very interesting question. You're in the middle of a war. You're making a siege on a city. Let's, for example, take our modern case. We are going to war. We're making a siege on the city of Gaza. We're fighting Gaza. It comes along Friday afternoon. Friday afternoon, an hour before Shabbat. So what do? We stop. We put down our guns. We stand up and yell out on a big megaphone. We say, "Excuse me, Hamas. In a minute, it's Shabbat. We'd like just to have a little break for 24 hours, and we'll come back after Havdalah." Now, obviously, this is not going to happen. International warfare, with the Hamas, there's no way you can make a break for Shabbat. Why are we allowed to continue our fight on Shabbat? Well, it's obvious. All of us know the answer. It's called pikuach nefesh, saving people's lives. We can fight on Shabbat because we're saving people's lives. We're going to save by killing the enemy, by finding the hostages, by stopping the terrorists. We're saving people's lives. They're shooting missiles at Tel Aviv. Of course we can fight on Shabbat. So why did the Gemara say that we can continue fighting on Shabbat? Because of the words ad ridata. Because it says you can fight until you finish them off. Tell me you can fight because it's pikuach nefesh, because you're saving people's lives. And here comes Rav Goren's brilliant answer. He says, the verse is not coming to tell you that you can fight to save people's lives on Shabbat. That we know from the simple laws of Shabbat. We can drive a lady to hospital to give birth on Shabbat, Mezal Tov. We can go to a doctor to save someone's life on Shabbat, Mezal Tov. We don't need the verse to tell us that we can fight till the last to save people's lives. Says Rav Goren, it's coming to teach us something else. It's coming to teach us that we can break Shabbat even when it's not to save people's lives. Wow. The verse ad ridata is coming to tell us that when you're in a war, you fight till the end, even on Shabbat, even if it's not to save people's lives. Let's look at who says this. One of the great Rishonim, the Ribash, says like this. We look at our source sheet, we see that in source 3, the Ribash says, Yesh ba heter achad miyuchad. There's this special leniency when you're in a battle. She'im itchilu ein mafsikim. That if you started going to war, you don't stop. Umechalalina to Shabbat lekol tzorkei hamatzor. And you break Shabbat for everything you need to do for your battle. Afilo shalom mipnei hasakana. Even if it's not dangerous. Not only to save people's lives. Kamo Shabbat b'Kabbalah, just like we have our religious tradition, ad ridata, until you finish them off, afilu b'Shabbat, even on the Sabbath. This source is telling us, says Rav Goren, based on this Ribash. The Ribash, he lived in the 1300s. Yeah, he lives in the 1300s, and he says that this Gemara is coming to teach us that once you're in a stage of war, you can break Shabbat even for the things that don't save people's lives. Obviously, in the army, we can break Shabbat to save people's lives. You need to send a tank in. You don't say, Shabbos, I'm stopping the tank. But what about the things that aren't needed to save people's lives, but might help you battle? What about them? The things around that aren't necessary for life-saving, but you would like to do them for the battle. Let's see, the Sfat Emet, the great Hasidic rabbi, he also wrote a commentary on the Gemara, and he says in source 4, Nireh devadai lo mari be'ika sakana. It's for sure we're not talking in this case that there's a danger to people's lives. Te'im kain lama likra. Because if that's the case, that there's a danger to people's lives, why do we need a verse? Al kain tzarich lomar. Therefore, we need to say damari heichesh yadenu tkifa, that we're talking about a case where we're in charge. We've got a strong army. There's no danger to people's lives. But if we stop for Shabbat, yitbatel hakavush, our war will stop. Va'atikra lomar deikbosh doche Shabbat. It comes to tell us that conquering is more important than Shabbat. Conquering the enemy is more important than Shabbat, even when there is no danger to life. And the Radak, Rav David Kimchi, also in the 1100s, in source number 5, says the same thing. And he gives us the source for it. And the source is very interesting. He says, Kach kiblu razal. This is what our rabbis have a tradition of. Ki biyom shvi'i shenilkata Yericho, Yom Shabbat haya. We remember the story of Yericho in the Sefer Yoshua. Yericho, Yoshua and all the people walked around the city of Jericho 7 times. And on the 7th day, the walls come tumbling down, as the song says. That 7 days, according to our tradition, was a Shabbos. Vafal pi hargu v'sarfu b'Shabbat. Wait a second. The Jewish people didn't have to wage war against Jericho on Shabbos. They could have waited one day and gone on Sunday, walked around it 7 times. But they broke Shabbat. They burnt the city down. They killed the enemy. But the same God who commanded us to keep Shabbat normally commanded us to conquer Jericho on Shabbos. And the same thing is true for any other city that the Jewish people would go to war against. The source is until you've completed the battle, even on Shabbat. And the same thing is true that we're commanded to give offerings in the temple on Shabbat. Let's summarize this idea and see what the idea of it is. I want to know, it's not pikuach nefesh to drive the catering truck out to the soldiers on Shabbat. No, they can survive and they'll have their sandwiches or their field rations. We don't have to drive a truck out to take them the best food on Shabbat. Says Rav Goren, yeah, you take the best food on Shabbat. You can drive the truck out. Rav Goren, but it's not pikuach nefesh. He says, yeah, ad ridita, until you finish the battle. Once you're in a battle, the laws of Shabbat are pushed off for the battle. Everything to do with the battle, even if it's not life-threatening, even if it's just to bring the boys better food, even if it's just to bring them new uniform, everything is pushed off because of ad ridita. Once you're in a battle, you can do the things that even aren't life-threatening. And that we learn from Yoshua, because the city of Jericho was conquered on Shabbat. The same God who told us to keep Shabbat told us to break Shabbat to finish the battle. From that, we learn out that every battle of the Jewish people throughout history is going to have the same idea. We're going to do ad ridita. We're going to do it until the end. Why? Apparently, there are some mitzvot that are more important than Shabbat. We've already know one of them, saving people's lives. Saving people's lives is more important than Shabbat. And so many of us, myself included, have driven people to the hospital on Shabbat to save lives. We all know saving life is more important than Shabbat. What else is more important than Shabbat? Well, the Radak just told us. I'll tell you what's more important than Shabbat. What's more important than Shabbat is giving offerings. The offerings in the temple, which involve cooking and all this type of thing, shchita, they're more important. God told us, give my offerings in the temple even on Shabbat. They're more important. And now we have something else that's more important. The battle for the Jewish peoples. The battles of the Jewish people apparently take precedence over Shabbat. We can see this idea in a remarkable source that nowadays many people are quoting. There's a famous book, the Book of Education, Sefer Chinuch. That's quite an early book in Jewish history. There was a rabbi who wrote a commentary on it, the Minchat Chinuch. Rabbi Bad in the 1800s, he wrote a commentary on this book, and that's a very learned book called the Minchat Chinuch. It's a commentary on the Sefer Chinuch. And he asks a very interesting question. He says, how are we allowed to go to war at all? In war, people, lo alenu, we shouldn't know any sorrow. People die. In this war, many holy soldiers have died. Who gave you permission to get in their tank and go into Gaza? You're putting your life in danger. A Jew isn't allowed to put their life in danger. What's the source that allows us to put our lives in danger? So this very interesting source from the Minchat Chinuch in source 6 says as follows. He says, it's true. Every mitzvah is pushed aside if it's dangerous. If it's going to be dangerous to light Shabbos candles, it's forbidden to light Shabbos candles. But this command, which God commanded us to go to war for, when we're commanded to go to war, and we know God will not command us commands that rely on miracles, like the Ramban says. If God tells us to go to war, and he tells us not to rely upon miracles, and the way of the world is that in a war, both sides of the armies, people die. We shouldn't know from any sorrow. Therefore, when we see that the Torah told us to go to battle, after sakana, even though it's dangerous, therefore the laws of danger are pushed aside for the mitzvah of going to war. So we find another thing that tops the war tops. The war tops, according to our source, Shabbat, and the war also tops putting your life in danger. Why is that? Source 7, the Rambam. The Rambam says in the Law of Kings and their wars, when a soldier goes off to war, Yishan al Makveh Yisrael, he should rely upon himself, put his faith in the hopes of Israel, in God. Or Moshi'in ba'et zara, that God will come and rescue us in a time of need. And every soldier should know that he's doing battle on the unity of God's name. Our soldiers are not just battling for the life of the Jewish people. They're battling for that, sure. And they're not just battling for the land of Israel. They're battling for the land of Israel for sure. But they're also battling for something much higher. They're battling for the revelation of God's name in the world. For Yechud Hashem, that the God of Israel should save them, that the world will look and see that the God of Israel is here in the world. That's a pretty high type of ideal in a war. Because of that, I believe, the Sefer Chinuch says that war tops putting your life in danger. Because we know that one of the things that Jewish people die for is Kiddush Hashem. Kiddush Hashem is such a high ideal that when God commands us to go to war, he knows that unfortunately people will die. Nonetheless, he commands to go to war. Getting back to our subject, now we can understand, why does war top Shabbos? War top Shabbos, not just because of Pikuach Nefesh, even beyond saving life. War top Shabbos ad ridata, until the end of the war, because the value of war is more important than the value of Shabbat. Just like the value of korbanot in the Beit HaMikdash is higher than the value of Shabbat. This leads us to a very far-reaching understanding of the relationship between the wars of the Jewish people, conquering the land of Israel, saving the Jewish people, and all the other laws in the Torah. There's a really interesting halacha about buying land in Israel. It's a great mitzvah for the Jewish people to buy the land of Israel and settle on it. What do you do if you can buy land in Israel, but the non-Jew is only going to sell it on Shabbat? The non-Jew is going to put up the auction. It's going to be on Shabbat. Can you break Shabbat to buy land in Israel? So the simple answer is no, but the more complex answer is kind of, yeah, kind of. Look in the Yerushalmi. In source number 8, the Yerushalmi says as follows. No, maybe we'll go to source number 9, from the Yerushalmi. Source number 9 in Yerushalmi, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi sha'al the Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi asked Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Ma'u likach batim min hagoy? Are we allowed to buy houses in Israel from a non-Jew? Amalei, he answered him back, Eimat, Rabbi Sha'al, when are you asking? B'Shabbat? Are you asking, can we buy houses on Shabbat? Tani b'Shabbat mutar, we've already taught you. You can buy a house from a non-Jew on Shabbat. Keitzad oseh, how does he do that? Mareh lo kisin shel dinerim, you point out to him your purse of money, right? You open up the safe. You say, look, I've got the money. Vagoy chotem, and the goy, the non-Jew, signs the sale and contract. Maleh la'arichim, and he takes it to the local authorities. Because we found that the city of Jericho was conquered on the Sabbath. It says they walked around it on 6 days, and then it says and it says they walked around it 7 times on the 7th day, and that was Shabbat. And then pay attention, kativ ad ridata. And it says in the verse we started our class with today, it says you conquer the land of Israel ad ridata, until the very end. Afilu b'Shabbat, even on Shabbat. What does this mean? The Gemara here, the Yerushalmi, is quoting the verse about making a siege on a city that you do ad ridata, until it falls, as a source for breaking rabbinic law to buy houses in Israel on Shabbat. In the early 1900s, there are stories of Jews who were coming back to the land of Israel and slowly buying up plots of land from Turks or whoever wanted to sell so that they could live here. In general, we know that the claims of the Jewish people stole the land of Israel need to be investigated greatly, to say the least. In many, perhaps most cases, the Jewish people, the Keren Kayemet of Israel, they purchased the land of Israel. Sometimes they relied on this Gemara to purchase it, even on Shabbat, by telling the non-Jew that they would buy it and telling the non-Jew to sign. Wait a second, but you can't tell a non-Jew to write for you on Shabbat. You can't do things like that on Shabbat, at least forbidden rabbinically. Answer, the Gemara says, no, we have permission. Ad ridata. What's the connection? Well, according to the way we've explained it now, the connection is very clear. The Gemara understands the words ad ridata, that you lay siege until it falls, until the very end, as a source to say that when you're in a battle to conquer the land of Israel, when you're in war, then the laws of Shabbat go down. The need to win the battle is more important than the laws of Shabbat, even if it's not life-saving. Buying a house in Israel has got nothing to do with saving people's lives, and nonetheless, the rabbis in the Yerushalmi quoted this source as a hint to the fact that the rabbinic law can be put aside to buy a new house. And now it all fits together. The rabbinic law can be put aside because when we're in a battle for the land of Israel, we go ad vidita until the end. Okay, if we want to say like that, I will give you a very practical example that my son, the Lord should save him and protect him along with all the other soldiers in the army at the moment. My son is serving way up north, and a week or two ago he calls up during the week and he says, Abba, for the first time, they're starting to let us travel and go and visit home for 24 hours. They're giving us 24-hour leaves. They're sending 2 soldiers from each unit out to go for 24 hours. They come back, they play tag, the next 2 go. 24 hours, 24 hours, 24 hours. I said, okay, sounds great. He says, what happens if my 24 hours is on Shabbos? 11 o'clock in the morning, I get out and I have to come back 11 o'clock the following morning. What happens if it's on Shabbat? So he told me very interesting things. He said that one of the rabbis of the Rabbanut of the Israeli army said that there might be a source for this. It's not to save his life. He doesn't need to come home to save his life. You could make such an argument. You could say that if for the mental health of the soldiers, for their ability to fight, and for this and that, you need to give them a break. Could make such an argument. I don't know. But my son for sure didn't need that. He a single boy to come home. I mean, it's nice. He gets to eat some hot cooking and he gets to do some laundry and gets to sleep in a normal bed rather than out underneath the bush. But it's not life-threatening. Certainly not in his case. Nonetheless, he said that some of the army rabbis said that it might be permitted based on this argument. Once you're in a war, ad vidita, everything you would normally do to run a war, which is to give soldiers leave for 24 hours break, can be done, and it overrides Shabbat. Eventually he came home on a Tuesday, and I don't know what the army ruled on this case, but there were great rabbis who used this argument for things like that, certainly to send them hot meals, certainly to do exercises of training and things that in a normal case, when it was a war, they would never think of doing on Shabbat. The army doesn't do regular training exercises on Shabbat. Why do they not do regular training exercises on Shabbat? Because they can do them on Sunday to Friday. Why do they need to do them on Shabbat? But now in the time of war, they're doing all types of training exercises and all types of activities on Shabbat. My nephew, who's down inside Gaza, they're going and doing things there every day. Many of them are for life-threatening, but many of them are in areas that are totally under the Israeli army control now, and there's no life-threatening situation, and nonetheless, they're doing the actions because of ad vidita. I promised you a second opinion, and this is the second rabbi I want to talk to you. Everything we said now was based on Rav Shlomo Goren Zatzal, the first chief rabbi of the Israeli army. After that, the chief rabbi of the state of Israel. But there was another rabbi at that time, who I also had the pleasure, I met Rav Goren, I had the pleasure also of meeting Rav Neria, Rav Moshe Tzvi Neria Zatzal. He is very famous. He was a student of Rav Kook, the first Rav Kook, and he set up the Yeshivot B'nai Akiva in Kfar Ro'eh, and I think he wrote the theme song for B'nai Akiva, Yarehem Nechem Shlucha. He was a great educator. He was an amazing Torah scholar. And he also, like many rabbis of his generation, started looking at these halachot that, as we said at the beginning of class, people hadn't discussed for 2,000 years. And he went to the exact same sugya, the same sources that we've seen, and he understood it differently. But Moshe Tzvi Neria understood that the Gemara, when it says ad vidita, is not coming to say that once you're in war, there's no laws of Shabbat. It's not going to say that at all. It's coming to tell you that pikuach nefesh, life-saving, is defined differently when it comes to a time of war. And let me explain why that is. We all understand the concept of pikuach nefesh, saving someone's life. Generally, we're pretty clear on what that means. God forbid you're in shul, someone has a heart attack. We know you get out the defibrillator thing and you call the ambulance and call Hatzalah, and off we go. We break Shabbat. We know that when my wife is pregnant and she says, here it is, Friday night, and the contractions are coming, we get in the car, we go to the hospital. Now, my doctor told me that I should take vitamins. I said, really, doctor? He said, yes, vitamins, very good. Vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin B12, you should take vitamins. I said, yeah, really? What will vitamins do for me? He said, you'll live longer. You'll have a longer life. But I think, I'm not an expert, but I think it's scientifically proven that taking vitamins does give people a longer life expectancy somehow. So there it was, Shabbos morning, and I went to take my vitamin. I'm all out of vitamins. All the vitamin C is finished. Can I get in the car and drive to the shop and buy new vitamin C on Shabbat morning? I hope at this moment everyone is shaking their heads and saying no. And you're correct. But wait a second, don't vitamins save your life? Don't they give you a longer life expectancy? Answer, don't push it. There's a limit to our definition of pikuach nefesh, of saving people's lives, and there has to be a real suspicion, God forbid, that someone's going to die here and now. It has to be something that's immediate and in front of us. That's the general definition of pikuach nefesh. Now, we're obviously going to get into gray areas, but and we're going to whenever we get to a gray area, we're going to lean to the side of being strict and save people's lives and break Shabbat. But in general, the definition of pikuach nefesh is something that is here and now in front of me, that's directly leading to saving someone's life. Says Rav Neria that all the sources we've seen are coming to teach us that when it comes to a community, when it comes to a national level, our definition of life-threatening is different. Our definition of life-threatening is different. We become much wider in what we define as life-threatening. The Gemara chooses to teach us this in relation to going to war. But it's true not only with going to war, it's true with everything. Let's go and look at one of the early sources who agrees and is a source for this understanding. And that is based on a Rambam in the Laws of Kings, source 10. The Gemara says, Chalutzei tzava, those soldiers in the front line, shenichnasu b'gvul akum, they've gone over the border and they're now in Syria, they're now in Gaza, they've gone over the border. V'chavshum, and they're conquering there, v'yashvu miem, and they're sitting there. Says the Rambam, mutar lehem le'echol nevelot v'treifot. They can eat unkosher meat, they can eat treifas, ubasar chazir, they can eat pig, v'kiyotzei b'zeh. Ve'im yirav, and if they're really hungry, v'lo matzu ma yechal, and they can't find kosher food to eat, el ma'achlot elu asurim, except these unkosher foods. The Rambam rules that if you are the Israeli forces and you've conquered the enemy and you're beyond enemy lines and you can't find kosher food, go for it. You can go to the local McDonald's and you can have a bacon burger, whatever they sell there. You can eat unkosher food in thing. Baruch Hashem, today the Israeli army, believe me, the whole Israeli army is based on a whole lot of Jewish mothers who make sure that their kids won't be hungry and they give them a lot of kosher food. Don't worry. But in this hypothetical situation where the Israeli soldiers have gone into the enemy lines, they can't find kosher food, they're really hungry, they can eat treif food. One of the great commentators on the Rambam, the Ridbaz, he asked the question, Te'im ein lehem ma she'echal, ma ayre chalutzei tzava, kulei almei nami mutar. Wait a second, if there are people who don't have what to eat, if they're starving, Why did you have to give me this case of soldiers? Anyone is allowed to eat unkosher food if they're dying of hunger. The question of the Ribaz on the Rambam is, you said that there's this special law of soldiers who've crossed the border. If they're hungry, they can eat unkosher food. Says the Ribaz, but it's got nothing to do with being a soldier in the army. It's got to do with the fact that you're dying of hunger. So he answers for the Rambam and he says, V'nireli liyashev divrei Rabbeinu. It seems to me that I can answer for the Rambam. D'lo'olam b'milchemet shah ha'amimai. We're talking about a war. V'lo irishahen mesukanim etzel re'ev. We're not talking about where they're in danger of dying of hunger. Ela she'einam tzrichim litroach levakesh ma'achal heter. But they don't have to go out and try and find a local kosher restaurant. Dekevan shenichnasu legvul ha'amim. Because they've already in enemy territory, im yalchu levakesh, if they go out to try and find kosher food, ma'achal heter, yakumu aleim amim. The enemy will come and attack them. V'dami l'hayda amrinan tsarin al ayriot al amim afilu b'shabbat. And this is similar to the law we learned that you can make a siege on enemy territory even on Shabbat. Let me try and explain. The Ribaz is saying an amazing idea here. The Ribaz is saying that we're not talking about people dying of hunger. We're talking about people who have food. They just like to eat dinner now. They're not starving. How much effort do they need to make to get kosher food? Says the Ribaz, if they go out and try and make a special effort to go and steal some lettuce, to go and get kosher bread, they're putting their lives in more danger. And therefore, those soldiers don't have to look for kosher food. Okay, so I want to let you in a secret. If you're on holidays in Italy and you're a little bit peckish, and the only kosher food you can buy is an apple in the shop, an orange here, a can of Coca-Cola there, and you're a bit hungry, you'd like some real food. So you actually have to make a huge effort to find the local Chabad shop and get some kosher food. I'm sorry, you've got no leniency. Because there's no pikuach nefesh. You're not going to die of food. Eat an apple. Buy another can of Coca-Cola. Go hungry until you get to Chabad house, and then you get a kosher meal. But if you're a soldier in a time of war, and you're a little bit hungry, and you go and say, "Well, wait till we get to the Chabad house in Damascus," that is putting your life in danger. Why is the law of danger, the definition of danger, changed? How come someone on holiday in Italy to get kosher food is not considered your life in danger, and in the time of war, it is considered a time of danger? Answer: when we have a communal situation, a big picture, the definition of danger changes. That's what Rav Neria says Ad Ridata is coming to say. It's coming to say that more things are considered as dangerous because it's bigger numbers. Let me give a few examples of this. There's actually a Gemara that says that if you have a coal, a piece of hot metal or coal that's sitting on Shabbat, you're not allowed to move it. It's muksa, it's a fire, you can't put it out. But if it's in the public thoroughfare, then because it's dangerous to the Rabbim, to the community, the law is much more lenient. How? When it was in my lounge room, I couldn't do anything with it. But when it's in the public thoroughfare, the law is more lenient. Either it's dangerous or it's not dangerous. Answer: in your living room, you can say, honey, just watch out for that. Kids, stay away, and you can keep your eye on it. But when we're talking about the public thoroughfare, when we're talking about hundreds, maybe thousands of people walking through, you can't take responsibility for everyone. The laws of danger change. Another example, where we see that the community creates a different definition. On Chol HaMoed, there are a whole lot of laws in the intermediate days of the festival that a person is not allowed to do. Whole lot of things on Chol HaMoed. A person can't go to work, whole lot of laws of how to keep the intermediate days of the festival in a sense of holiness. There are many leniencies. You're allowed to cook, for example. There are many leniencies. You don't have to take a financial loss. Based on that, many people, especially in Chutz La'aretz, who have to go to work, or they'll be fired, or they'll lose their wage. But one of the leniencies is very interesting. Sarkei Rabin, the needs of the community. Once it's the needs of the community, the laws on Chol Hamoed become completely different. But what's the difference between painting my house and painting the shul? Answer, the needs of the community are judged differently. I'd like to give some examples of this on a very practical level of what Rav Neri is saying. If you are an individual and you're told by your doctor you need to take medicines on Shabbat, you have to take a medicine 3 times a day, but you're a bit forgetful. Do we allow you to write down, took medicine at night, took medicine in the morning, took medicine in the afternoon? Probably not. We'd probably tell you something like, why don't you take a piece of notepaper and put it in your siddur on Mariv, and that'll remind you took the medicine at Mariv. And then in the morning, when you finish taking your medicine in the morning, put a little piece of notepaper in the siddur at Shachrit, and so on for the afternoon at Mincha. We'd say, make yourself a little note and put it in the siddur, and that'll remind you. Now let's all imagine Shaarei Tzedek Hospital. I don't know how many patients are in Shaarei Tzedek Hospital. I don't know how much medicine they take. We're talking thousands of patients. We're talking tens of thousands of pills and medicines that are taken every Shabbat. Can you imagine the nurses running around with little pieces of paper and sticking them in each patient's siddur and relying on that to remind them that they've given them morphine at 8 o'clock in the morning and they don't need morphine again till 2 in the afternoon? It wouldn't work, not because there's a difference in the sick person at home. If it was a single person at home who needed morphine with a private nurse, I would tell her, put a piece of paper in the siddur that'll remind you you've given the medicine in the morning. You'll see the siddur has a piece of paper in Shachrit and you know you've given the medicine. But we can't run a hospital like that. Why not? The only difference is it's the needs of the many. Says Rav Neri, Shabbat doesn't disappear in a time of war. The laws of Shabbat are just the same. But our definition of pikuach nefesh is different. Now let's compare and contrast the two opinions we've seen, Rav Goren to Rav Neri. Rav Goren said the laws of war override the laws of Shabbat. Rav Neri said the laws of war widen the definition of pikuach nefesh, of life-threatening situation, but they don't change our relationship to Shabbat. So what will be some differences between those opinions? Well, one very interesting definition will be the case of whether my son can get on a bus or drive home on Shabbos. If we hold by Rav Goren's definition, there's room to say that ad vidata, once you're in war, Shabbat is pushed aside. And if to run a war, you need to let the soldiers take 24 hours break, which is apparently what the army feels it needs to do, then Shabbat doesn't apply. According to Rav Neri, you would have to make a case to say that there's a sense of pikuach nefesh here, saving people's lives, which is probably very hard to find in the case of one soldier coming home on Shabbat. On the other hand, Rav Neri has a big leniency that Rav Goren doesn't have. For example, how to run a hospital. Everyone would agree that you can clean and sterilize the operating theater of a hospital on Shabbat. There's no doubt that every operating theater needs to be totally clean and sterile on Shabbat. It's pikuach nefesh at the first degree. But can you clean and mop the entrance hall to the hospital? I don't know, is that direct pikuach nefesh just in the waiting room of a hospital? Maybe yes. According to Rav Goren, you would have to prove that it's direct pikuach nefesh, because it's not a time of war, and the laws of pikuach nefesh stay the same. But according to Rav Neri, we've now widened the laws of pikuach nefesh. Our definition of saving people's lives is much wider, and therefore, to run a hospital, we would have a lot more leniency. Rav Neri's logic is used often to run the Israeli police department. The Israeli police do lots of things on Shabbat which aren't directly life-saving, but they're life-saving in the big picture, in the long term. Most burglaries and theft is not life-threatening. But if we have a city, if we had a country where all the mafia And all the burglars knew as soon as Shabbat came in, that was the time to go to people's houses and do robberies, because no one's going to call the police, because no one's going to take action. Then in the long term, that will lead to pikuach nefesh. But in the short term, there's no pikuach nefesh. So that would be another case where we have an argument between these two rabbis. What we've seen today is a remarkable case of how Jewish law of war that hasn't been applied for 2,000 years suddenly has come back to life. We would have liked that these laws would have said theoretical, that the redemption would come with angels on high, and the whole world would suddenly do tshuva, and all the Hamas in the world would suddenly want to come to Nishmat and learn Torah and do tshuva. But apparently, that's not how God wants it to be. Apparently, he wants the Jewish people to be very involved in the process of redemption. And so he awakens us. He awakens the gvura, the might of the soldiers. And he awakens the gvura and the might of halacha and the Beit Midrash. He awakens us to delve into Torah that's lying dormant for so many generations, and to revitalize it and to apply it anew. One of the most amazing things that I personally, as someone who teaches halacha and learns Jewish law all day long, see in the present war is the application of Jewish law that hasn't been applied for 2,000 years. May we be blessed that this learning, along with the learning of all the Jewish people and our great mitzvot, should go to protect the soldiers, to give us a great victory, to bring all the hostages back home, to heal the wounded, to heal the soul of the Jewish people together. And we should know that when we go to war, we go ad ridata till the very end in order to bring a complete salvation to the Jewish people. Shalom uvracha, b'sorot tovot.